Hi, I'm Bill Hodges, and this is Spotlight on Government. And today we've got a program that we're going to talk about that kind of borders both on government and non-government. It's a group of people who have come together to make something really important happen. And we have Freddie Barton here. Freddie, you're the executive director.
Yes.
Of Safe and Sound.
Safe and Sound Hillsborough, yes.
Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Tell our people what Safe and Sound is all about.
Sure. Safe and Sound Hillsborough is a multi-sector, multidisciplinary approach to reducing violence throughout Hillsborough County. It's different from most violence prevention initiatives where we, instead of an intervention or law enforcement-based strategy, it takes a public health approach. It brings together the efforts of Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners, the cities of Tampa, Temple Terrace, Plant City, the Public Defender's Office, the State Attorney's Office, Hillsborough County Public Schools, Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, as well as the Administrative Office of Circuit Court, and the Children's Board of Hillsborough County, all putting in resources, both cash and in kind, to see what can be done in neighborhoods most susceptible, vulnerable, and impacted by violence. Using a public health model that focuses on prevention versus intervention, we seek to provide programming so that we can detect and interrupt potential issues, that we can identify and treat those who are at highest risk, and then also mobilize communities to effectuate change. This effort was brought to light by Commissioner Kevin Beckner in response to Sandy Hook. He brought together a group of policymakers, of stakeholders, and it started out a few years ago with around anywhere from 70 to 80 individuals that were concerned about the violence that's happening and that has happened in Hillsborough County and the need to stop it so that it doesn't happen anymore. And so we find ourselves at the present moment where the CDC of Tampa has been brought in to serve as the management and fiscal agent of Safe and Sound Hillsborough, and we're leading that charge. We have our strategic plan that has been created, and we're going into communities right now. Instead of blanketing the entire area of Hillsborough County, we're focusing on 4 key zip codes: 33610, 33612, 33566, and 33598. That's East Tampa, the University area, Plant City, and Waimama. And
by the way, since you brought up public health,
yes,
and then you mentioned CDC, we're not talking about...
Not the Center for Disease Control.
Yeah, I know that, but a lot of our listeners won't know that.
Right.
So we want to be sure that they get that grasp.
Absolutely. It's the Corporation to Develop Communities of Tampa. And I use that joke and always say we're not the Center for Disease Control. But, you know, since we bring that up, we are fighting a disease. We're fighting 2 diseases. We're fighting the disease of poverty, and we're fighting the disease of violence. And we know that they run hand in hand. So by using a public health approach where we identify risks and treat it as a disease and try to find the root causes of this, we can look at preventing this from escalating in the future.
When I first came to this country from Canada, we moved into what was then a slum of Detroit, and it's not even there anymore. They went through and squeegeed it completely off. But at that point, I'm thinking back and wondering what an outside agency could do to come in and change the life of the people there. Grab us and inoculate us. What does an outside agency think they can do coming into a Waimama or an East Dayton or one of those there, or Tampa, excuse me, dropping back 20 years. What does areas like that think they can do when they walk into these neighborhoods? What is the strategy for changing it?
The first thing, and where most programs fail or struggle, is they don't do the number one thing, which is listen. You have communities who have been plagued by violence, they've been plagued by poverty, they've been plagued by issues year after year after year, and they cry out for services, they cry out for programs, they cry out for things of substance. And for Safe and Sound or any other initiative to want to go into a community, they have to listen first, and that's what we're doing. When we started developing the strategic plan, we held stakeholder meetings, we held town hall meetings to hear from these communities, and that's the first thing. We have to use a data-based initiative. We have to have a data-based plan. We have to analyze the data and see what needs to happen. And then by listening to the stakeholders, we can then provide or offer some suggestions as far as solutions. Because if we come in and just try to provide the solutions without hearing the input, it's not help at that point. And we really operate under the tagline, if the community doesn't ask, it's not help at that point. And so who better to tell us what's needed in a community to help prevent violence than those people who are most vulnerable and susceptible?
I wonder, though, do they know what they need?
Right.
I mean, it's like going into a doctor's office and saying, I'm sick, and the
Right.
doctor's saying, well, what do you need?
Right, and we go in, and for those communities and residents who say that, using that public health approach, we detect and interrupt issues. So if someone says that, my community is sick, well, what's wrong? I'm not sure, but I know that we've got a lot of issues right now with kids and gun violence. Well, let's now start getting to the root cause of that. Let's look and see how accessible are guns to kids. Let's look at the truancy rates in these areas. Are the kids going into schools? If they're not, why? Is it a transportation issue? Is it a connecting issue? Do we need to bring families together and provide parent engagement training or parent involvement training? What are some of the things that we can do to remediate these issues? But the only way we can do that is by going into the communities and activating the strategic plan, listening to the residents, working with the other stakeholders, the other nonprofits in the areas, the faith-based communities, the pastors of those communities, the local businesses, and get them involved and wrap around. We have to look at the workforce development opportunities. Are there job opportunities in those areas? If there are they hiring from that local community, or are we getting people from outside of that community to go into there? We have to get down to the root causes, and because of the way Safe and Sound is structured, we are bringing together committees that are designed to go after business outreach. We have a Cultivating Communities Committee that's having town hall meetings and listening to residents. We have an Improving Neighborhoods Committee, which goes in and deals with resident stakeholders and neighborhood associations. We have our Maximizing Impact that speaks towards leveraging all of our resources and then putting resources out. We have a Data Committee that's just focusing on getting all of the information from the residents, from communities, and from other models out throughout the nation, so that we can really study and figure out what needs to happen. If we're focusing on East Tampa, the solutions in East Tampa are going to be very different from those in Waimama, in Plant City, as well as university areas. So we're constantly looking at the data, evaluating the data, and bringing in those residents.
What do you think separates them? Poverty is one that is fairly common for the whole thing.
Correct.
And being not or being a minority is certainly another one that brings them together. Mm-hmm. What do you think separates them?
You have different pockets of different cultures. It's not just
culture.
It's not racial barriers. It's cultural changes. In East Tampa, you have a different culture set than you have in the university area, and certainly different from Waimama and Plant City. And so you have to go in and speak to the communities and learn and identify with that culture. So then you can build trust with the communities, and you can't overpromise and underdeliver. You have to listen, and once you agree to this is what we're going to do to mobilize our efforts, then we follow up on that. And then we check the pulse later. Is this working? What's going on? Our strategic plan has been crafted to go for 5 years. We know that in a public health model that even after 5 years, we're not going to see leaps and bounds. We're not going to move leaps and bounds as far as changes, but we can start seeing the needle move. We started seeing that a little bit last summer, this past summer. The city of Tampa came out with its Stay and Play initiative, and it was designed to extend the working hours of 9 parks in the city of Tampa up until midnight. It was a way to curb youth violence. Instead of the kids being out in the streets and getting into all kinds of things, what the city of Tampa did is they extended the working hours of the parks and said, go to the parks, go to these rec centers if you want to be out and about. Most people thought that this was a way for kids to just play football and basketball up until midnight and then go home.
They're not breaking windows.
Right, they're not breaking windows. But what Safe and Sound Hillsborough did is we attached ourselves to this effort, and we were appreciative of the city of Tampa for doing this. And we chose one park in one community in particular, which was Grant Park. We chose it because it was both a city and county park. And we went and we spoke with the youth that were in the rec center. And surprisingly, the kids told us, we don't just want to play sports. We want things to do. We want programming. The older kids who were 17, 18, 19 said, we need jobs, but I don't know how to fill out a job application. Can you help me do that? I want to learn about music production. I want a mentor. I want someone to come in and help me. I have some concerns and I want to speak to someone about it. And so we then mobilized some of our committees to go into there. And what was interesting is the one thing that will always be true is if you give kids an opportunity to talk, you'll learn a lot. And we started talking to these kids, and we had a neighborhood exercise where we gave them a sheet of paper. It was in the shape of a heart. And we said, on one side of the heart, we want you to tell us what you like about your neighborhood. And on the other side, we want you to tell us what hurts you. So on the front, they wrote that they love their community, they love their rec center, they love their family, they love their school. On the back side, I just want the gun violence to stop. I want to stop hearing gunshots. I want to stop hearing about my friend who got hurt for some reason. I want all that to stop. And so then we began a discussion around youth and gun violence. And Judge Ralph C. Stoddard mobilized a think tank that started to look at how accessible guns were to kids, look at youth and gun violence. And we started having discussion with these kids during this whole summer. And the kids exposed to us that they didn't understand the concept of gun violence. They didn't understand the repercussions of actions of being involved with violent crimes and gun crimes. And the question that we posed to them is, do you know what happens if you're with a friend of yours and they shoot someone and you're just there as a bystander, you're just there with your buddy and something happens and he shoots someone? Do you know what happens to you? And the answer was nothing. It's not my gun. I wasn't the shooter. I was just there.
Wrong.
And after a lot of discussion, we came up with the concept of creating a mock trial. And through this exercise, we took kids from the Grant Park area over to the courthouse, and we had volunteers from the state attorney's office, the public defender's office, the court system, as well as Judge Stoddard. And we let the kids serve in all of the roles, from defendant to witness to public defender to state attorney to an actual judge and to jury participants as well. And they replicated a scenario where we spoke just on that. There are two kids that go to a neighborhood and one of them has a gun. The other kid knows he has a gun, but decides, hey, it's no problem. We're gonna go see a buddy of ours. And they run into two other kids and a scuffle breaks out. In the midst of that melee, a kid gets shot. Now the bystander now is on trial. And before that, we had Dr. Kathleen Heidi from USF, a nationally known criminologist, to look at creating a survey. And we asked several questions before this trial. We asked them, how safe do you feel in your neighborhood? We asked them, would you speak to law enforcement if you knew someone was not the shooter? Would you speak to law enforcement if you knew someone was the shooter? And how safe do you feel in your community? And other questions. And the responses that we got back initially were, I feel safe in my school. I don't feel safe in my community. And I don't feel the need, I don't want to talk to law enforcement if I knew someone was not the shooter. And I'm not going to speak to law enforcement if I knew someone was the shooter. And then we played out the trial. And we had two different juries. And the interesting thing was we got two different verdicts. One verdict was a guilty verdict based on the facts. And the other jury came up, they were deadlocked. So we said, okay, it's going to be a not guilty verdict. And we started asking questions. And we started getting a dialogue from these kids. And we asked them, based on the facts, what do you think should happen now? And again, the kids did not know the ramifications of these actions. And so at the end, we had the sentencing portion of the trial. And we had persons to speak on behalf as far as the parent, the pastor of this kid, the teacher of this kid, all saying that this is a good kid. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And surprisingly, Judge Stoddard let them know that, you are a good kid, you just made a mistake, you went over here and you if it were up to me, I'd let you go. But the law says that you need to be penalized. And immediately we saw an immediate reaction on the faces of the kids. And we asked the same questions at the end. And we didn't see a gigantic change, but we saw an immediate change. We went from a low percentage of youth saying that they would not communicate to law enforcement to now more kids saying, yes, I need to speak about this. And we asked why. Because I don't want to be held accountable for someone else's actions. And I don't want this to happen to me or to anyone else. That shows the relevance of what we're doing. Because as you start working in these communities, just small groups of kids at a time, small groups of residents at a time, and we connect them together through a scenario like this and other efforts of Safe and Sound, we can then get the message out. When you think about violence prevention, you're talking about generational change. And so we can't just look at the older generations. We can't look at just high school students. We've got to look back down to middle school students. This year, Hillsborough County Schools partnered with us on sending out a survey to all middle schools and all high schools. Last year, we just used the high schools in a small sample size. This year, we sent it out to every middle school and every high school, 100 surveys per grade level. And we asked questions about violence in the community. We asked questions about public safety and community and feeling safe in your community. And surprisingly, we sent this out to 100, we sent it out to all the schools, 100 surveys in each grade, and we got over 72% of the surveys to come back. Kids responded to this. And we're looking at that data and we're going to evaluate to see what other services are needed so that we can start seeing the needle move backwards instead of forward.
Unfortunately, we're in a fast food society.
Correct.
You want it now.
Right.
And I've often in some of my seminars talked about changes, and that if I started out from here to go to LA and I was 1 degree off, I would probably end up somewhere in Mexico.
Correct. Correct.
But it's going to take me 2,000 miles
Right.
to get there in the wrong place.
Right.
So we need to look at this minor change that you're creating. And I think that's very more important, is to create that. But you also have to go into the community, it would seem to me, and right now, almost all ethnic communities
Right.
are circling the wagons.
That's right.
And when they circle the wagons, they circle it for the good people and the bad ones together.
Correct.
And what are we going to do to break that mentality of circling the wagons and protecting, as for instance, looking at the people, the black youth
Right.
that have been shot or killed in the last year and a half.
Right.
Many of them did not follow a directive. Some of them were armed. Some of them had great long records of violence. And yet the community circled around them, made them heroes.
Right.
What does that do to your youth?
Well, we have to get to the youth and let them understand that, regardless of how others may feel, you have to look at how this impacts your life. When you are involved in a violent crime, or if you're involved in violence in the community, it's not just you that you're not the only one affected. Let's look at now your parents are affected, your family's affected, your friends are affected, that community's affected, and now you have communities going on the defense, and now that creates mental violence, that creates emotional violence as well. So just that one action of yourself, you have to understand that you're not just accountable for yourself, you're accountable for how this is going to affect. And again, this is how, using the public health model, getting to the root cause of it. You're talking about changing norms, changing behaviors. And in order to do that, using your example, it's not going to happen overnight. We've been, discussing the issue of violence in communities since Cain killed Abel, and so it's something that just happened.
And it's not limited to ethnic communities.
Correct.
Either. There's a whole lot of violence goes on all over the country.
Violence prevention is not a law enforcement issue. It's not an ethnic issue. It's not a policy issue. It's a community issue. And we're talking about reducing violence all throughout Hillsborough County. We have pockets of violence all throughout the area. It's not just in African American communities, it's not just in Hispanic communities, it's not in any certain geographic area. We have incidents of violence in different areas all throughout Hillsborough County. And if you take a cross section, Hillsborough County is the microcosm of the nation. So if it's happening here, it's happening all over. The only way that you can stop it is by preventing it in the first place and trying to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. The only way you can do that is to mobilize all the efforts and get all of this. Every single citizen in Hillsborough County is a stakeholder in this, and so we've been able to.
Would you like to name all of them?
I don't want to try.
We just had a discussion about trying to name all the stakeholders in this before we came on the air, and he said, "Well, I can," but if you leave one out, you're in trouble.
Right, we won't do that. But it's, and the reason I say that is when we talk about going into these communities, right now we're focusing just on 4 zip codes. But those 4 zip codes still show a cross-section of the county. No matter how you go, you have different socioeconomic levels. You have workforce development needs all throughout Hillsborough County. When we look at employment opportunities, there are individuals that need employment opportunities in East Tampa. There are those in University area. There are some in Plant City. There are some in Waimama and Temple Terrace. Everywhere throughout Hillsborough County, we have to look at that. We have to look at how do we address truancy. We have to look at how do we address domestic violence. It's not just gun violence or use of weapons. We have emotional violence throughout the community. We have to attack the bullying that's occurring in our schools, because that then escalates into other incidents of violence.
I think we have to look at the court system too.
Correct.
I mean, there's no question about it statistically. If a young black man does something or a young white man does something, more likely he's going to jail, the black man.
We have to look at those factors. We have to look
That
at how
screws
media
everything up for a lifetime. For
Right. We have to look at how the media plays into things, and we have to look at how do we change the image and perception of community safety. When you say violence prevention, most people immediately think law enforcement. Well, this is a law enforcement thing, and we know that there's a concern amongst
That
different
really should
communities.
be kind of a last resort.
It
We got to
is.
save these kids before
Right,
they get
that's
hit
right,
bad.
and that's why Safe and Sound Hillsborough is a prevention-based strategy. Once it's to law enforcement, that's intervention, and law enforcement is not the only solution.
I'm
That's a
amazed
part of
though
it.
when you told me. I did not realize that Mama didn't have a sheriff's station anymore.
Correct.
That just amazes me. We've got them in Apollo Beach. We've got them in Sun City Center.
Correct.
I mean, we got to keep those golf carts slowed down. But it would seem to me that there was an immediate need of having somebody over there these kids could go to.
Correct, and I know the sheriff's office is trying to look at different solutions for that. There were some issues and concerns about staffing and making sure that there was a need for it, and that they had the resources available. I know that they're addressing that right now, but that's by listening to the community, and they're saying, don't take this away. Let's find a way to do this. We'll help police ourselves, but we still need the support of the sheriff's office. So I know that there are plans in the future to make sure that they can help work within that community. And but law enforcement is not the only solution. It's a part of the solution. But as you said, once it gets to law enforcement, it's just about too late. There's a decision that has to be made at that point. We are looking at going into communities, finding out what got us here in the first place and how we can change it right now so that we don't see this disease either grow or evolve. And that's the efforts of Safe and Sound Hillsborough. Kudos to the folks that put this thing together to really say that we have to do something right now, because when we look at our heat maps, we have red pockets. We have.
Now let's talk about that heat
Yeah.
map, because I found that fascinating.
Yeah, our data committee pulled together all different factors, and we looked at truancy, we looked at poverty levels, we looked at access to public spaces, we looked at the incidence of violence, we're looking at youth and gun violence, and these heat maps just show all throughout the county from a green to red system, where green being no violence at all or very little violence, all the way to flaming red that shows this is a really big area. We're looking at those heat maps and saying, okay, we need to focus. And when we picked our 4 areas, we went straight to the heat maps and we said, let's look at this. And even though some areas weren't directly, flaming red, we saw that, hey, this is an area that we need to focus on as well.
But you've got various heat maps. And
Correct.
I thought that was fascinating,
Right.
where you overlaid them.
Correct.
You found out that
It's
at the very
interesting.
bottom of the map is kids and truancy.
Right.
And that
it's
seems to be
interesting.
the basis.
It's very interesting when you take the truancy map and you put it on the sheet of paper, and you take the community violence map and you put it on top, they almost mimic or they bleed through each other. And so we have to, again, generational change. Where by going into the schools and working in the neighborhoods to address the issue of truancy, we see that we can stop things so that they don't grow up into community violence. So we're looking at all of our different heat maps. We're looking at the domestic violence map to see what we can do to provide programming and services and mental health support, substance abuse support. We have our Family Health and Wellbeing Committee is working on something right now to address the issue of violence and how it's related to substance abuse, specifically prescription drug abuse. We hear the stories of kids getting access to their parents' medicine cabinet. There was a story of a kid from the age of 14 all the way to 19. He was going in the medicine cabinet, and he wasn't taking the pills because his parents would count them, but he was shaving the pills. And so the parents would actually look and count the pills. They didn't think anything was wrong. But the kid from 14 to 19 was
He's probably failing in school.
and he was abusing the prescription drugs. And so, it used to be where folks, when the prescription drugs had expired, they would pour them down the toilet and flush them down the toilet. Well, we're finding out now you shouldn't do that now. They're finding traces of Xanax in areas such as New York
Right.
in the water water system. And so we have to address that, because that also is an issue, and it also focuses on the public health approach. And so working with other agencies and other stakeholders, the Hillsborough County Anti-Drug Alliance now has a new initiative. They're working with a product called Deterra, where it neutralizes prescription drugs. You take the prescription drugs, you pour it in a bag, you fill it with water, it neutralizes the drugs, and it's biodegradable. They have up to 10,000 bags that they're trying to put in the hands of residents, and Safe and Sound is going to partner with them to get this out, so that we're looking at all the factors that cause community violence and trying to address these as we go forward.
Broke my heart. With these drugs, it really bothers me, because they prescribed some things for me that didn't work.
Right.
But I've got a whole 30-day supply of them.
Right.
Now I've got to throw them away, and they cost the insurance company and me a pretty penny, and there's people who could use them, but they can't give them to them.
They can't give them to them, and you have to find a safe way to dispose of them.
But that's another program.
Right. I'm not endorsing or anything, any process. But we have to look at, these are the kinds of things that we have to look at, is what are the things that are causing community violence? One of the other issues is we're looking at the no snitch policy that's in communities, how there's not a trust factor between communities and law enforcement. How do we change that dynamic and change the image so that there is that trust factor that's built? And Tampa Police Department, Temple Terrace, Hillsborough County Sheriff's, they're all working together in this effort.
That's part of the circle the wagons, though.
Well, it is, and so
how going back to our frontier ancestors, they circled the wagons when they felt threatened. You've got to take away that perceived threat from the outside before you can have it sensed on the inside. So
and
it's not all in that community. It's got to be society as a whole has to work together to make this happen.
And Hillsborough County, again, is the microcosm of the nation. And so if, right now we have all the law enforcement agencies that are part of this prevention-based strategy to say, I don't want to arrest folks. I don't want to do this. If it gets to that point, then, it's too late at that point. What can we do to stop this, specifically, with preventing community violence? And so we're seeing that law enforcement is now going into communities and speaking to residents and engaging in conversations so that there's a trust factor that's built. On all of our committees, we have representatives from Tampa Police Department, from Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Our vice chairman of our leadership council is Chief Kenneth Albano from the city of Temple Terrace, and our chair is Julianne Holt, our public defender. So we have the individuals that are there that are concerned not just from an intervention-based strategy, but a prevention lens. And you have individuals that are there at the table. That's what it's got to be.
We already have more people in jail than communist China.
Right. So we need to work on preventing this from happening. It's a community issue, and we are encouraging neighborhood associations, crime watch agencies to come together, band together to get neighbors off their porches.
If people wanted to help you, what could they do?
They can call.
We only got about 30 seconds.
Right. They can call our office. They can come to our community meetings. We're having an all call for support. We have several committees that individuals can join to be a part of this effort to put programming and services to get neighbors off their porches, into the streets, into the community, and concerned in this effort.
And it's an important effort. There's absolutely no question. If we don't do that, we'll have more and more of these cities.
We'll have another generation that's now concerned about community violence, and we've got to prevent it now so that we don't see this happen.
How many schools can we see burned? With gunshots. They're burning. They're exploding churches now. They're burning churches.
Again, Commissioner Beckner started this as a result of Sandy Hook, and now in this year we have Oregon that just happened. And so we have to look at the community as this is as a public health issue, as a disease that we need to figure out how to prevent from spreading.
I'm with you 100%. Freddie Barton,
Thank you, Bill.
Executive Director of Safe and Sound. You've really given us a lot to think about.
Thank you.
I've learned a lot from you in that short time. Would you come back?
I sure will.
I'd like to hear how these things are working, because if we don't do it, we're going to be in deep trouble. I'm Bill Hodges. This is Spotlight on Government. You're unique, you're special, and you're great. Tell yourself so often, because you are, and we'll see you on the next Spotlight on Government. And again, Freddie, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.